Welcome to The Classical Mind, a podcast about the great books in the Western canon. We're your hosts. I'm Father Wesley Walker.
And I'm Dr. Junius Johnson.
And we are back after we recorded a bonus episode with the unveiling of our Season 4 schedule, but we still have to finish up Season 3 before we get there. And so we are here today to talk about Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I'm very excited for this. Junius, what was your experience like with Frankenstein before this?
Well, zero. So I had, of course, heard of the novel, and I must have seen either a movie version or at least a short parody of it, fairly early on. So that was kind of part of the background story knowledge of growing up is, oh, this guy creates this monster and the monster goes crazy and starts killing people. And it's a whole big thing, right? And then the villagers come out with torches to take the monster out and throw him off a cliff or something like that. And I thought, I don't really need to read this novel. Like, I'm not that interested in the macabre and horror and this type of thing. And so, I'm not really missing anything. So this was my first time reading it. And there was a point partway through this when I thought to myself, wow, they really need to make a movie about this book, because I feel like none of the movies that I've ever seen have been about this book or have been this story at all. It is so very different to everything that I thought I knew. Now, listen, readers, I knew that the Frankenstein was the doctor and not the monster. I'd been set straight on that a long time ago. But pretty much everything else I thought about the story was off as well. And I loved it. I thought this was a wonderful novel, and I deeply enjoyed reading it. Couldn't put it down. Thank you. So great. Sorry.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. I have read it once or twice before. I think twice. I don't remember the first time, honestly. It was a long time ago, maybe either high school, college, sometime during that range. And then I listened to it, I believe. What's the podcast with the family that teaches literature? They're all literature teachers. I feel like you would probably know them, Junius, and I can't remember what the podcast is called now, but they did a reading of it, I think, on their podcast. And so I listened to that. And so, yeah, it's a great book. Agree with you about the movie. I'm excited because they are working on a movie that should come out, I think, in November of this year, maybe. And it will, looks like, based on the commercial, that it will be more faithful to the source material than any of the movies we think of, with the green guy with the big bolts in his neck and stuff like that. That's very much not what's going on here. And so that seems to be a fairly large, I would assume, kind of barrier to overcome as one approaches a text like this, is just how different the source material is from the pop culture iterations of it. One kind of wonders, I'm sure there's been some work done on this. I did not really have time to look it up, but an interesting project would be kind of tracing those derivations from the source material. Like why, when they made the black and white movie, did they do it this way instead of actually trying to stick with what the story is about?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you've ever been frustrated at a movie that was not faithful to the book, you thought maybe, Peter Jackson and Lord of the Rings, you should have done this or that sort of a thing. Well, I mean, this is like the master unfaithfulness. It's barely, you almost want to sue them for using the name Frankenstein, because they're just making up a different story entirely. One of the things that stood out to me was that so much of the movie things that I've seen, and the pop culture versions of it that I've seen, focus on the creation of the monster. That takes up a large part of the thing, is him working feverishly towards this, and when he throws this, it's alive, that sort of a thing. Whereas that whole creation of the monster passes in about a page in the book. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in what happens next. Right?
It's about living with the thing that has happened, not also, one thing that gets added to a lot of the film adaptations is he's always got a sidekick in the films.
Igor,
Igor, the assistant, and that's really not prevalent in the novel at all. It's not present in the novel at all.
No one's ever with him when he's working on the monster, either the first one or the aborted second attempt that we'll get back around to. Yeah.
So it's very, very different. Now,
it is.
One other big kind of difference that exists in the telling of this story is that it was actually written twice, sort of. That's right. Published twice. The first publication was 1818, I believe, and the second publication was 1831. Yeah. And listeners, as an experiment, Junius and I both read different editions. So I read the 1818 one, and he read the 1831 edition. But perhaps we could talk a little bit about generally why there are two editions of it and what differs between those two things.
Yeah, so 1818 was the date of the original bet with her husband Percy, and who was not her husband, I don't think, at the time yet, and Lord Byron, the other great romantic poet, when they were all spending the summer or some or the year or something like that in Switzerland. And I think it was Byron who was like, let's all write scary stories. They had been reading, scary stories together and whatnot and having a blast. And it's like, we should all write one. And neither of the guys did it. They kind of started and it didn't go very well, and they kind of dropped off and quit. And Mary had this image, this idea she settled on of this man creating life, and then the creation standing over his bed at night, terrifying him. And she couldn't sleep, and she realized, well, if it scares me that much, it could scare other people too. And so it began that way. So the 1818 version is the original version of the tale that came out of that first bed. There was a lot of, she was showing it to them at the time. She was getting input from them about it. Originally, she was thinking a short story, and I think it was Percy who said that she should expand it out into a longer and make it a novel. And so that's kind of what happened in 1818. Then, it was published, that version was published and did fairly well. And apparently, there was some societal backlash about certain aspects of it. And the 1831 edition took a lot of that reader criticism into account. It deepened certain aspects of the story. One of the main things that it seems that she added in the second one is there's a lot more talk about fate. In the second one, you almost feel as if Victor is being driven by fate and doesn't have as much agency as perhaps he had in the 1818 version. That's about all I can say about the differences, because I've only read the 1831. I was assigned the 1831, and that's the only one I read. I will say that among Mary Shelley scholars, there's a preference for the 1818 as representing the purer vision. They consider that the 1831 represents her sort of giving in to popular taste and opinion and changing certain aspects of the stories to suit Victorian sensibilities a bit more.
Very interesting. Yeah. Well, as we get in talking to it, I'm sure we'll come upon some of those differences, and that might be enlightening, I suppose.
I think it'd be nice to start. There's a couple different times that she begins this thing, because we have an introduction from her at the beginning. And I have an 1831 introduction. So this is after she's done stuff. And by the way, I ought to say that she says her own note about the difference between the editions at the end of the 1831 introduction. She says, I will add but one word as to the alterations I have made. They are principally those of style. I have changed no portion of the story, nor introduced any new ideas or circumstances. I have mended the language where it was so bald as to interfere with the interest of the narrative, and these changes occur almost exclusively in the beginning of the first volume. Throughout, they are entirely confined to such parts as are mere adjuncts to the story, leaving the core and substance of it untouched. That is not what Mary Shelley scholars say. They think that is public posturing. And that in fact she made some more substantial changes than that, and that they exist throughout. But I want to say a little bit. I mean, I've said something about this, the genesis of how the text came, where the text came from. I also want to say, one more word about that, and then I want to consider the way the novel begins, which is with the letters of the sea captain, who's going to be an important character, the person that Frankenstein will ultimately tell his story to. But in this 1831 introduction, she makes this statement about beginnings. And she says, everything must have a beginning, to speak in a Sanchian phrase. And that beginning must be linked to something that went before. The Hindus give the world an elephant to support it, but they make the elephant stand upon a tortoise. Invention, it must be humbly admitted, does not consist in creating out of void, but out of chaos. The materials must, in the first place, be afforded. It can give form to dark, shapeless substances, but cannot bring into being the substance itself. In all matters of discovery and invention, even of those that appertain to the imagination, we are continually reminded of the story of Columbus and his egg. Invention consists in the capacity of seizing on the capabilities of a subject. and in the power of molding and fashioning ideas suggested to it. She's talking about how the novel came about, and she goes on to then describe the circumstances of their conversations between her and Percy and Byron. But I think that's an interesting word to keep in mind as we think about the creation of the monster as well. That because the monster has a lot of questions. One of the poignant questions that I love the monster asks Victor is, why did you make me so ugly that I would be a horror even to you?
Yeah.
Right. Like that seems a bit much. And part of the thing the monster's got to realize is exactly what Mary Shelley's saying here, because he goes on to say, I might as well find that passage real quick. Hang on. He says, I know what side of the page it's on. Almost there. Well, he says, why did you make me so fearsome and horrific that I'm a horror even to you? God had pity on man and adorned him with loveliness and beauty. Here it is. Accursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God in pity made man beautiful and alluring after his own image. But my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. And I think what the monster's not getting there is the distinction between the type of power God has and the type of power Victor has. What Mary says about invention coming not out of void, but out of chaos is true of human creation, but not of divine creation. That asymmetry between Victor as a creator and God as a creator is one of the themes that runs through the story. And I think the monster both does and does not take notice of it, right? I mean, there's some sense in which he dares raise his hand against his creator because he knows his creator is not God. But there's other senses in which he's kind of mad at Victor for not being more godlike because Victor is his God.
Right. It kind of reminds me a little bit, not to go off on a tangent with another piece of literature, but the Silmarillion and the creation of the dwarves. Because they, the main or big god creates the beings in Middle Earth, but then one of the sort of under gods creates the dwarves without his permission. Eventually, the main god blesses the dwarves, and the god who creates them is more godlike. He wants to teach them his crafts, and he's the smith god, and they end up becoming smiths and stuff in that world. And so it's kind of a fascinating juxtaposition, because in both cases there's sort of an under, a subject, a creation of the bigger being who does an act of creating on their own. Mm-hmm. In the Lord of the Rings, that creation finds its way back into the sort of larger ordering of the universe. But in this story, it never happens. Yeah. There's a kind of constant discord. Yeah. As a result of the creation.
And in a way, so I'll make two connections to that. Since we're in Tolkien world, I'll mention that Frankenstein's invention is much more like Morgoth's invention of dragons, right? Where he creates these monsters in the depths of Angband, and when Glaurung, the first of the dragons, issues forth, it's this calamity for Middle Earth. But it also reminds me, for my Platonists out there, of the Timaeus, where we have this demiurge who is not a creator in the Judeo-Christian sense of a god who creates out of nothing, but is a craftsman. He shapes material that's already there. And that's why in the Timaeus, he gazes upon the form of the good of which he is not the author, and he copies that to the best of his ability. And that's the creation of the gods. And then the gods then use their own lesser power subordinate to him to create lesser things. And he's got to let the gods do it, because if he does it, everything he creates is going to be divine. Everyone does the best they can, and that's the best he can do. So his workers can't do that well, and so their creations are less than divine, and they give us the physical elements and man and the whole physical world and all of that stuff. So you have these layered systems of sub-creators who are doing the best they can based on the amount of power they have, but they have decreasing amounts of power as you go down level to level.
Yeah, no, I think that's apt, because that would explain a great disparity between one of the gods in the Lord of the Rings universe and his ability to care for his creation, and Frankenstein's inability to care for his creation. As human beings, we barely have ourselves figured out. In fact, we don't really have ourselves figured out. You can tell Frankenstein doesn't have himself figured out.
That's
And
right.
then all of a sudden he's creating life. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, people who think that having a baby will fix their problems. Rarely is that the case. Never is that the case.
Yeah.
Except this is even worse
Yeah.
somehow, because you've built something totally new.
And because it's unnatural, right? And unnatural doesn't have to mean bad. It's artificial, maybe I should say, instead of unnatural.
Yes.
Right. A baby proceeds according to natural processes. And so you're working along with you're working along the grain with what God's doing. And really you're working along with God, because so much of that child doesn't come from you, right? I mean, children who are so very different to their parents right away, the person, all that kind of stuff is out there. But in Frankenstein's instance, it's all manufactured, made by hands. It's artificial. It's according to his art, and his art is what he understands as a young university student who, yes, has surpassed all of his teachers and all of the art of his day, but he still is. I mean, he sees that it's possible to create life, and he pursues that first glimpse rather than thinking to research what the implications of that would be, what the limitations of that would be, all of that sort of a thing. And so he's right at the edge of his own understanding in the moment of creation as well. And so he's doing a lot of stuff that he doesn't, it's not really under his control. And you can see that by the way that it destroys his health.
It's a good advertisement for why we need the humanities and why a STEM education isn't sufficient on its own.
That's right.
STEM is great. STEM gives you great power, but Frankenstein clearly doesn't have the humanities or a good grasp of the humanities, or else he would realize going forward was not a good idea.
Yeah, he needed to read more Thomas Aquinas and less Albertus Magnus in those early stages before he came to the university.
That's right. That's right. So one of the kind of key, I think, themes, or one of the things that gets wrestled with a lot, is the relationship between creature and creator. And I think coming from a Christian tradition, you know, this is something we think about a lot. What is the duty of a creature towards the creator? Anselm, for example, founds his whole atonement theology on the kind of distinction between creator and creature. You know, what does man owe God? We owe him everything because he made us and we wouldn't exist without him. And when we sinned, that adds a debt to something that already included everything. And so how do you pay that back? Yeah. But you see this, I mean, even on the very cover page, at least in the 1818 edition, I don't know if your book has the cover page of it, but it's called Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus in 3 volumes. And then it's got a quote from Paradise Lost. Did I request thee, maker, from my clay to mold me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me? Which nice. I think is interesting. And it raises a question to me, and I think we've already talked about it a little bit. But the question is, why is it that Frankenstein recoils from the creature? Obviously, the creature is ugly, but he was already ugly. So what is it that makes him pull back from his creature? This is something he made. When God sees man, he loves man in the scriptures. But here, the creator recoils. Like, why?
Yeah, and there's a physical hideousness of it. I mean, he doesn't go into, you don't get the details of he's robbing graves to get body parts and that sort of a thing, but the descriptions of what he's doing are enough to support that interpretation. You know, he's working with horrid materials, and the work itself is abhorrent and everything, and it's as if he's not really, he's just kind of got his head down and he's charging blindly ahead while he's creating the thing. And then once he finishes it, all of a sudden he steps back and looks up and sees what's going on. So I do think there's an element of physical revulsion, but I also think you're right that it can't be merely, and maybe isn't even primarily, physical revulsion. That there is and if so, then what is it? Is it the monster, or is it the fact of manufactured life that makes him recoil as he does from that first vision of it? And it's not entirely clear to me on this reading what the answer to that question is, because I'm not sure it's entirely clear to Victor either. I think several things come home to him in that moment and lead to a single response of revulsion, and he just he's undone. He can't face the enormity of all those feelings, and he just flees.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about this captain at the beginning, who is on his own journey of exploration and discovery. And it's very confusing to me why we were talking about him, because these are letters that come before chapter 1, and I wasn't sure how all this fit in and what was going on. I did appreciate that he was going through Archangel, Russia, because my cat is a Russian blue, and the other name for that breed is Archangel cats, because they first came to the West. They stowed aboard ships in Archangel, Russia, about English ships, and came back with them to England because they had enough of the cold. So at the end of letter 2, our captain says, he's talking about, there's something at work in my soul which I do not understand. I'm practically industrious, painstaking, a workman to execute with perseverance and labor. But besides this, there is a love for the marvelous, a belief in the marvelous, intertwined in all my projects, which hurries me out of the common pathways of men, even to the wild sea and unvisited regions I'm about to explore. He's a Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
And what gets Frankenstein to tell his story to this guy is he recognizes his own madness in another, and he wants to dissuade him from pursuing something that might bring as much unhappiness to him as it has brought to Victor himself. But I also, there's this interesting thing that he believes in the marvelous, but before he believes in it, he loves it. He loves it and he believes in it, is his order of presentation. The monster, and indeed the man as well, are both marvelous in the sense of their wonders, their unparalleled sights in this age of the world. And the story, as well as the monster itself, which the captain will in fact encounter, challenge the captain's automatic love of the marvelous. And even if he means believe in the sense, not just that I believe that the marvelous is out there, but rather I believe that the marvelous is worthy, almost a beauty will save the world type of thing, then the monster will challenge that too. The monster will remind him that the marvelous can be marvelously awful as well as marvelously good. And so I think that's a really important, it's cool setting this up from this captain, and we have this guide to see Victor through. So we get to see Victor through Victor's own eyes as he tells his narration, through the captain's eyes, but also through the monster's eyes.
You get this kind of interesting dynamic with Walton too. One of the things that I think makes him important is he's looking for a friend. In the letters to his sister, he complains multiple places he's looking for a friend, and nobody on the ship kind of meets up with his interests, and they all kind of think he's probably too weird, and he doesn't really like them very much. But throughout the novel, you have a number of characters kind of looking for friends. Frankenstein thought he and Waldman, one of his teachers, were friends.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can make the argument they're not really. And then the monster, of course, wants companionship, wants a friend, and never gets it. So you've got these different characters all looking for friends, and it's like they're always looking in the wrong places or at the wrong times. Like maybe before all this would have happened, maybe Walton and Frankenstein would have been good friends.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when Walton is interested in Frankenstein, the only reason Frankenstein is talking to him is because he recognizes that same streak in Walton that he wishes he had rectified in himself before there were bad consequences. But I don't gather that they ever become friends.
No, I don't think Frankenstein's capable of it by the time he meets Walton.
That's
because he's become monomaniacal, and that's
he's unavailable. Yeah,
he is. Yeah, he's unavailable. No, Mr. Frankenstein, no here. That's very much his issue, right? Monomaniacalism, whatever the word of now form of that is, because he gets single-mindedly focused on the creation of the monster, and in so doing, he neglects everyone back home. He neglects his dad, whom he loves. He neglects the woman he was raised with, who's not a sister, but he calls her cousin because they're meant to be married, even though they've been raised together. And his father even says at one point, maybe we messed up in raising you guys together. Maybe you don't think of her Maybe you think of her like a sister. And he's like, no, no, no. Trust me, I don't. We're good. And then, of course, his one true friend that he had back at home as well, he neglects all of those guys, stops sending letters, stops responding to letters. He neglects his own health. He neglects everything but the creation of the monster. And only when it's done does he have the chance to look up and think, oh, I should have done that. And then the same thing is happening at the end of the story where his whole purpose is the destruction of the monster. And so, you know, he's not only does he not want human ties, he couldn't have human ties because he firmly believes that he will die on this quest, either killed by the monster in failure or shortly after the fight with the monster. That's the only thing he's living for anymore. So yeah, he's radically unavailable to be what Walton wants him to be. And that's one of the tragedies we readers are sensible to because of these letters in the beginning, as we see Walton's loneliness, and then we get to see Victor's greatness, and we see how they actually could have been great friends. And this is another beautiful thing that I won't say the monster took away, because I don't know. I think it's a complicated question who's to blame here morally for these losses, and I hope we'll talk about that separately. But it's another beautiful thing that's lost in this story is the potential friendship between Frankenstein and Walton.
That's right. That's right. Let me ask you a question. Do creatures have a demand on their creator?
You know, that's a great question. And let me rephrase it just to make sure that everyone's following, and also to make sure that I'm following correctly. The question, another form of the question is, does a creation, by virtue of being the creation of such and such a person, therefore have a right to expect certain things from that person?
Correct.
Right. And I suspect that it very much matters who the creator is. Right. I think that makes a great deal of difference. For example, if I create a literary character in one of my stories, do they have a right to demand of me the things that the monster demands of Frankenstein? Namely, you know, a chance at happiness and acceptance and companionship and that sort of a thing. Well, I mean, it seems that no. It seems like I can write whatever I want. I can create the characters any way that I want to. And if they were to complain, you would say, well, listen, that's just the story you're in. I mean, it's not, you don't get to choose the type of story that you live in, right? If I were to create a living being, a monster, I don't mean a child, I mean a monster like Frankenstein did, I certainly would not have a moral obligation. Here's what I want to say. I don't think anyone has a moral obligation to provide that which lies outside of their power. Right. And so the types of anything that my creation might desire of me that I'm not capable of giving, or that I can't give with absolute confidence, is not a true demand on me. Beyond that, I think maybe as far as I'm willing to go, I'm totally spitballing here. That's a great question. I think as far as I'm willing to go is to say that the creation has the right to request, I wouldn't even go so far as to demand, but to request an account, a logos, right? Okay, so you made me. Why? What was I made for? What was your intention? Right? And then there may be further things that it occurs to the creation to ask, depending on what the answer to that question is. If you made me for the glory of science, why didn't you make me attractive enough that we could have shown me off at shows and things, and not terrified everyone and whatnot? But at the end of the day, the creation probably doesn't have the right to hold the creator accountable for the answers he gives to those questions. It's purely informational. Right. But another way to ask it, so that's looking at it from the standpoint of what rights does the creation have towards its creator in and of itself. Another way to ask it is, since the creator is also under authority, what responsibilities does he have towards the creature, which are grounded not in the fact of in the nature of the creature at all, but are founded in the act of creation itself? Would it be symmetrical Or would they be different? I kind of feel like, whereas the creature might ask me why I made them and kind of have to live with my answer, that God could ask me the same question and he doesn't have to live with my answer. He can judge my answer. Right. And so that leads me back around to this. Sorry, I'm taking the long way around here because I never thought about it this way before. That leads me back around to as the creation, as the sub-creation, then, right? The monster that I've made. I at least have the right to call my creator into the higher court. Right. Maybe you don't have inherent obligation. My being doesn't create obligations on you because I'm just this thing that you decided to make, but you are accountable for what you did with the gifts you were given. And one of the things you did with those was to make me. And so I can ask you to consider whether you have acted faithfully in the way that you chose to create me or in creating me at all.
That's interesting.
That may be the best question you've ever asked me.
Wow. Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. Certainly there are scriptures that come to mind that seem to indicate that, you know, the creation really can't talk back to the creator in terms of, you know, he's the potter, we're the clay, these kind of things. On the other hand, you know, you read the Psalms, and certainly there's plenty of creatures complaining towards the creator about the way that he acts towards them or doesn't act, or whatever other particular complaints they have.
Job comes to mind.
Job, yes. In fact, yes, I know my Redeemer liveth, on the one hand is a great prayer and song, on the other hand is a great complaint. You know, I know my Redeemer lives, but it's not you. It's somewhere out there in the cosmic world. There's this, you know, someone who will redeem me. In some ways can be an act of defiance, you know, depending on which hermeneutic you're reading. It is interesting, and I think it's really, frankly, hard to consider this from a perspective that's not Christian, right? Because as Christians, we would say God hates nothing that he made. If he made it, he loves it in some way. And so he wants what's good for it. And he has even built that into the fabric of creation itself, right? When God created the world, he built in a kind of utility into the way things are that is good for us. And that reflects his kindness towards us. Frankenstein, partly I think due to his limited, I mean, Frankenstein is a part of creation, which makes it hard, right? He is a creature himself, making another creature, so he can't design the world around that creature because the world has already been designed by another. And so in some ways he set himself up to fail just by doing that. But even then, he doesn't offer any provision for the creature. He doesn't come alongside the creature. He doesn't teach the creature. He doesn't aid the creature in any way. Clearly, the creature has the capacity for it because he's able to learn so much just from watching the family in the hovel. So yeah, I mean, I think what you say is probably, in general, I think a creature can probably say, well, why would you make me? And then the answer to that may dictate certain parameters. If a character in your story asks you, why did you make me? The answer has to do with a sort of literary agenda that you have. And so your creation of that character is good insofar as it realizes that agenda. But if you create out of a place of gratuitous love, which is how God creates the world, then the answer to why do I exist is very different from a sort of literary driven creation or a scientific driven creation. You know, it's very different. But I do think there's a degree to which a creature, based on whatever the purpose of their creation is, could perhaps make certain demands of the creator. It would be unfair if God created us to love and enjoy him forever if he somehow cut himself off from us and made it so that we could never actually, you know, but he doesn't, so we can't do that. But like, I think in Greek mythology, maybe we could go there. I think human beings have the right to complain at the Greek gods, you know, for the way that they act after they have created humanity, and, you know, the way they conduct themselves towards humanity. I think that would be a valid complaint.
Yeah, well, in part because the Greek gods could do, like, they could guarantee our happiness. They could act differently towards us. And this is Frankenstein's going to sit right on the boundary between this, because there's both in the question of answering the monster's demand. There's both what he can do and what he can't do. That's really important, and that's why he winds up ultimately saying yes and then ultimately saying no, is because of what he can do and then what he can't do. And I would go in Greek mythology. I was wanting to go to Pygmalion, who, if I remember the story correctly, and it's been a while since I've read it, he creates the statue not in order to have a woman for himself, but for the beauty of the statue. He's a master sculptor, and he makes this beautiful he makes it for beauty's sake, and then he falls in love with the beauty that he made. And so to me, that's interesting, because there's the original intention is simply beauty, and he succeeds so well that he himself is enraptured by his own work, and then he desires it to come into another type of relationship with him, and it has to be endowed with life in order for that to be possible. And then once endowed with life, it gets to choose whether it wishes to give itself to Pygmalion or not, right? And that's the decisive break for these mortal creators like Pygmalion and Frankenstein, is you can give life. Well, there's this line in Shakespeare, in Henry V, when he says, when you command the knee of the beggar, can you command the health of it? That is to say, when you can command someone to kneel before you as king, but can you command them to be healthy? You cannot. Right. Your authority has a limit, right? And so Victor and Pygmalion perhaps can command the life of their creation, in the sense of commanding that it be alive, but can they then command the quality of that life? And yet this is exactly what the monster is wanting Victor to be able to do, is to assure him of a life worth living.
Yes, that makes sense.
There's an asymmetry between what even the Greek gods, what gods can do and what men can do. And that asymmetry is relevant, because even if we're willing to call the Greek gods creation of the men creation, we have to call Frankenstein's creation of the creature subcreation.
Right.
It's funny how once we agree to put Tolkien on season 4, it just starts filtering through everything we say.
That's right. The risk we run.
All in Tolkien.
Okay, let's talk about something somewhat related, but I think it's maybe a different angle, different avenue that we can go down a little bit. So first, we might want to define the term. You've used it once already, but Shelley was part of a literary movement, Romanticism. What is Romanticism?
Yes.
For the listeners.
Yeah, Romanticism is a set of artistic ideas. I was going to say poetic, but that's not true. It's broader than that, and many of them were multiple artists. They're painters and other things as well. That is devoted to, it's the ascendancy of the affective part of the human person, the part that is moved. It's all about being moved. And so, for example, I think it was Wordsworth who defined poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions. And that's a good sense of, that's kind of that you could kind of say that for art, really, right? The spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions, that there's a naturalness to it that's a response to great things experienced. And so the Romanticism flows from, it only takes root in a great soul. And the romantic ideal is the person who goes up on the mountain alone and has visions of amazing things and comes back, and out of that fullness speaks. So Zarathustra is a great example of a romantic hero. Father,
I don't know about great, but yeah, he is an example.
Right. So that's kind of, and so that's what it was at a sort of a philosophical level. Of course, they were writing poetry, and it was not spontaneous in the sense that contemporary poetry is. It was highly structured and metered and all of that sort of a thing. But it was really trying to set all of that in the background, in the service of the experience. And the poem was really about communicating an experience, and very deeply interested in the natural and nature as a locus of the sublime and the transcendent, but also the inner nobility of man as sort of nature's crown and jewel.
And part of that I think, movement too found itself at odds with a kind of emerging scientism or technological mindset. And I think that's a lot of what's going on here in Frankenstein. So it's interesting because as I was reading this, I was also reading a book called Introduction to Christianity by Joseph Ratzinger for a class that I'm taking. And for those who don't know, Ratzinger later became Pope Benedict XVI. But there, in that book, he talks about a major shift in humanity's posture towards the world. In the ancient and medieval period, people valued being, in which I think would a way that would shed some light onto the first question about what demands the monster might have on Frankenstein. But that's not quite what I'm focused on here. In a world where the truth of being is valued, a thing is good by virtue of its createdness, right? So that's where we get the idea. God doesn't hate anything that he made. But in the modern period, there was a shift. First, there was a shift away from being to the historical, Ratzinger says. So we can only know what has happened. And you see that in the early 20th century, late 19th century, with the emphasis on the historical approaches to religion and things like that. But then we kind of get this perspective as time goes on in modernity that we can really only know what it is that we make. And in this way, then, Frankenstein sets up, I think, a kind of frightening reality, because one can only seek to create personal life in the unnatural ways that Victor does when one doesn't know who we are. He doesn't know who he is. And you kind of get that by the way he loses himself in study. So by creating a derivative being, then the monster becomes a mirror through which we begin to know who we are as human beings. And that mirror, I mean, in some ways, it's not all bad, right? I mean, the monster is not all bad. He has the capacity to love. He has the capacity to reason. He has the capacity to learn. He appreciates beauty. There's much about the monster that's good. But the mirror can be a warning to us, because if we lose sight of who we truly are, creatures, then we insist on setting ourselves up as creators. So then you get into the Jurassic Park dilemma. We didn't think whether we should, we just wondered if we could. So Hart talks about, David Bentley Hart, Christian philosopher, talks about during the scientific revolution, sort of questions of final and formal cause got bracketed. And then eventually we just dismissed them altogether. And I think you see of evidence of that mentality in the book. I think Shelley is very aptly critiquing that. So of Victor early on, it says he might dissect, anatomize, and give names, but not to speak of a final cause. Causes in their secondary and tertiary grades were utterly unknown to him. By cutting science off then from all other fields of study, you get this really impoverished view of the world. So even, I think at one point, Frankenstein says, in other studies, you go as far as others have gone before you, and there's nothing more to know. But in a scientific pursuit, there's continual food for discovery and wonder. So the problem is that once you untether science's investigation of material and efficient causes from a final and formal cause, you're left only with the exertion of power, as seen by Waldman, right? One of the professors that Frankenstein had at college. He's a modern natural philosopher whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt, and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles, he says. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They have command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquakes, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows.
So in that sense, then, this novel, which is so permeated by this particular sort of scientific view, because of the negative consequences of Frankenstein's total commitment to that negative view, becomes a form of manifesto for Romanticism. Right? Because by taking the heart out of the thing, you don't just lead to something that is heartless in the sense of uncaring. You lead to something that is monstrous in the sense of a terror and a disaster.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. Frankenstein says early in his story to Walton, this is in chapter 4 of volume 1, he says, "Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow."
You know what's funny? I had that quote written down exactly as the next point I was about to say. So, great minds or something like that. Classical minds, we might say.
Classical minds think alike.
That's right.
Yeah, and there's a lot in that quote. I'm very interested in the going beyond what his nature will allow, but also it's, he's not quite got it right, because he says how dangerous the acquisition of knowledge is. It's not the acquisition of knowledge per se that's
Correct.
dangerous. It's the type of knowledge you're trying to acquire and the contextless way in which you're trying to do it. Right? It's really techne, because all of his knowledge is pointed at. He's like, "Ooh, I wonder, like, what would it take to make life? Could I do that?" And all of a sudden, everything is in service of this one project. And he learned that, I think, from his earlier alchemical studies, because alchemy is a very teleological science, but it's always these. As it's portrayed later outside of the Middle Ages, it wasn't this in its medieval forms, but at least from the late Renaissance on, it was about, we all focus on the proximate end, the creation of gold. That wasn't what alchemy was trying to do. Alchemy was trying to create the philosopher's stone, which would allow you to make the elixir of life, which would give you immortality. The creation of gold was a byproduct of the process of the philosopher's stone. You would have to do it on the way to doing that, but it was no worthy goal in and of itself. And that's what Frankenstein is after, right? He's after the philosopher's stone. But he's doing it without reference to what else might the byproducts of that be. And he doesn't want it for the sake of extending the life of those who exist. He wants it for the sake of bestowing life, which is about the most godlike pursuit I can imagine a human being getting involved in, right? And so it's back to the old thing. He wants to be like God apart from God.
Which is funny because even when he's successful, right, it shows you how ungodlike he is, because, when God creates the world, at least from the Christian perspective, there is a plan for that world. There is a reason for that world. But this is almost just pure peacocking. It's like just doing it because you can show off and you can do this thing. But then once he does it, he doesn't know what to do because there is no plan.
Yeah. Well, and you could imagine the Judeo-Christian God, if per impossibile he were to accidentally create a world, you could imagine that he would take responsibility for it. Like, oh, blimey, didn't mean to do that. Well, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work and figure out a plan for these guys. Whereas Frankenstein literally runs away and like won't go home until he's sure the thing's gone away. And then once he gets home and the thing isn't there, he just assumes the problem's resolved.
Yeah, that's the most puzzling part of the whole thing. Yeah. In a way, it's a reverse Jonah, right? In the Jonah story, Jonah runs away from God, but in Frankenstein, the God, runs away from his creation.
Yeah.
It's a very weird, very strange thing.
Yeah. Gosh, it makes one wonder. I mean, given how, I was not prepared for the eloquence of the monster. Again, nothing in my encounters with the fake versions of this story have prepared me for that. And so when he comes up and he's like, I mean, immaculate. He's got like an Oxford education, off of 3 books. But it just makes one wonder what could have been if Victor had been a father to him and educated him. Now, I have a problem with the monster's protestations about his own morality. He claims that, and I'm only calling him monster. I'm not happy with calling him monster, by the way, folks.
Right.
Because
creature. We call him creature.
Creature's good, I suppose. I'll call him creature. I'm not. So the creature claims that he's only a monster, that is a moral abomination, because he's been cut off from society, because no one gives him even the slightest sip of the milk of human kindness. His only belonging ever happened when folks were unaware that he was there and he was eavesdropping, right? So he can sort of have a voyeur's belonging, but no one will offer him the right hand of fellowship. He so quickly goes from woe is me to kill them all, with very little ground in between, that I can't help but think that there's something more going on there. It's not just the fact that nobody loves him, everyone runs from him in terror. Although, well, anyway, it's not just that. It's that it's why does he go immediately to hurting others with his pain? And specifically, and you know, not only hurting others, but so quickly and effortlessly murders a child. And then he murders a woman with equal ease. It seems like killing all things human comes equally easy to him. I think that the monster's account of his own moral progress is lacking, because I think that if it were really just this one thing, then I think there would be shades of moral lapse, and not immediately from being the sweetest possible devoted servant to being the murderer, indiscriminate murderer of those who serve his plans.
Yes, though
you sound very unconvinced.
Well, I think two things to consider as sort of counterpoints. The first would be, I mean, I think he perceives that humanity doesn't just not extend fellowship to him, but that they are actively seeking to exterminate him, which seems to be vindicated every time he has an encounter. I mean, you know, when he finally reveals himself to the family, the dad's fine with him until, because the dad's blind, he can't see him. But it's when the rest of the family walks in and they can see him that they lash out in violence. And his own creator, has lashed out in violence towards him and has expressed a desire for him to be exterminated. And so I think I can understand the extreme to which he goes and the speed at which he gets there, because he is functionally locked in a sort of kill or be killed kind of world. Now, you know, of course, that doesn't justify the killing of a child or an innocent woman, but I think I understand how he got there. The second is that it's an interesting question. He doesn't really have a fall, does he? I mean, I guess he sort of does, but I guess that it is the killing that is the fall, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't really do anything wrong until then.
Yeah.
And so that's his first sin, as it were. And one can understand, I think, the speed at which sin can cause one to spiral. I think. I mean, the second sin we have in Scripture is a murder. You know, it happens pretty quickly as well. And so I think, especially if that's his first sin, I can see why that becomes a habit of his, that he resorts to that violence. That is part of the sort of ongoing effect of his fall. But one does, I mean, I almost have in mind like children, you know, I mean, when your child wants to be seen, sometimes they will go to great extents for you to see them, many times inappropriately so, you know. And it's almost, I almost gather that's what the monster is trying to do to Frankenstein, right? He wants to get his attention. I mean, he wants to hurt him, but he also wants his attention.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll notice me, you know.
And in a sense, he gets what he wants, even in their ultimate enmity, because he has Frankenstein's full attention.
That's right.
Right. And so it's like, he's paying attention to me. No, I get that.
Which is why at the end, I think the monster is, once Frankenstein dies, the monster's sort of like, yeah, well, okay, I'm sad now.
It's worse than that, and we need to talk about that too.
But yeah.
But on your first point about this, he's in a fight or flight, he's in a kill or be killed type situation. I mean, that's precisely instinct and not moral judgment, right? And so it kind of underscores his self-narrative as a moral agent who's been driven to negative morality by the way humans are treated him. It's much more of an animalistic type thing. And I would say that, you know, the difference between your first sin being disobedience and your first sin being murdering a child does seem a bit stark. It matters that, Cain's killing of Abel comes after the race has become sinful. It's not the first thing that comes to his non-fallen mind. But, there's no sense of innocence in him. He's not in a state of innocence. The creature isn't. Precisely because Frankenstein can't give that.
Right.
Right. He can only be sinless in the sense of not having committed a sin yet, not in the sense of being non possum peccare, of the original people in the garden, right? Unable to sin. Or I said it was possum peccare at possum non peccare. So there's a different quality to the sinlessness of Adam and Eve than there is to the sinlessness of the monster. The monster's sinlessness is much like if there is a sinless moment in the life of a child, as a baby firstborn or something, that's what the monster is. And I think Mary's trying to portray that, that he's the total tabula rasa coming into the world. And so the world is telling him what to be. And here's my point then. So if he's a tabula rasa, and so he's looking to the world to understand what he is and how to be. And the world says, monster, monster, monster. And he says, fine, then I'll be the monster. Right? It's that that tangled moment. All right, then I'll be the bad guy.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't follow that showing him acceptance will make him into a saint. Right? Because he's taking this negative identity that's placed on him and he's inhabiting it. But to be good requires more than just being told that you're good from the outside. It requires something from the inside. And in his defense, he doesn't say he'll be a saint. He just says he'll become harmless, right? Get me a woman and we'll go off together and we'll live our own lives apart from men and we'll do no harm. And that'll all be fine. So he's not claiming that he'll be good, but there is this sense early on before he makes that claim that like, I could have been good if everyone hadn't done me wrong. And it's like, yeah, I'm sympathetic with what you've experienced. Like you were done wrong. These humans, I wish they could have slowed down and gotten to know what was facing them and not just reacted out of the horrible appearance of it. Not that I'm saying I would do any better, but at the same time, your morality is your responsibility. That's what it means to be a moral agent, creature. Right? How you choose to respond. You could have been superhuman. All you had to do was not sink to the level of what the humans did to you, and you would have been greater than all of us, right? But instead, you let us turn you into one of us. What am I? What am I? And I love the Frankenstein calls him demon and beast and all these other types of names, and he calls him man. Right. and in his mouth, man almost becomes an expletive, man, don't speak to me of this or that. And he keeps asking this question. I didn't know what I was. I didn't know who I was. What kind of thing am I? Well, that could have been an opportunity to make yourself into something worth being. Right. I think that's my point.
Yeah.
You mentioned Paradise Lost earlier. Your edition has that bit from Paradise Lost in the beginning. I find that really fascinating. Mine didn't have that, and I feel gypped. It is fascinating to me that Paradise Lost is one of the 3 books that he has.
Yes, and the one that he spends, I think, the most time analyzing, because he kind of analyzes each book. Paradise Lost is definitely the most one, the sort of most important one. But there, it's interesting, right? Even that beginning quote is sort of like, well, I didn't ask to be made.
Yeah,
you didn't consult me before you made me. It's kind of the idea.
He internalizes my favorite part of Paradise. Well, not my favorite part, but one of the nicest parts of Paradise Lost is when Satan claims that he's going to leave hell and go up to earth to deal with situation up there, and he's like, what am I talking about? Right? That was all bluster for the demons. Me miserable. Which way I fly is hell. Myself am hell. Right. And then the monster sort of picks up on this. Yeah, I take hell with me. And that's the response to all of that. All of those folks who read Paradise Lost and think, well, Satan's kind of the hero. He's fighting God and having a good time doing it. And it's like, no, you've fallen for the very speech that Satan gives the demons. But Satan right afterwards says, that was all blowing smoke. That's not true. I hate my life and I hate myself. Right. And the monster reaches that point, and you certainly can. It's a really powerful literary role model for him to inhabit. Right.
obviously, murdering children is bad.
Yes, listeners, please, if you get nothing else from this episode, please take home that murdering children and women is very bad.
Yes. Classical Mind podcast, very anti-child murder.
Yep.
We're the first to, you heard it here first.
That's right.
What should have the creature done? Now, obviously, not kill is a good start. But in terms of positive, like, so the acquisition of virtue, for example, would be a noble pursuit. However, virtue kind of assumes a community in which those virtues can be exercised. And he's been thrust out of any sort of community. So even if he were to go off by himself, it's just hard to imagine what kind of moral sort of quality of life he could have, you know?
Could I answer the question by saying what book I wish he had?
Yes,
either instead of one of the maybe instead of the misfortunes of Werner, if I could replace that with another book, I think I would give him the Consolation of Philosophy.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that if he had the Consolation of Philosophy, he could learn that virtue is not just about how we act towards our fellow man, but rather how we act towards our fellow man is how we externalize the virtue that's within us. And that the pursuit of a life worth living, now I'm sort of referencing Socrates here, but he can get it from Boethius, is something that is about the inner disposition of the man. And that in solitude, he could pursue a life worth living, a life of contemplation, a life of enjoyment of the beauty of the world around him, which he was nearly drunk with anyway, right?
Yeah, he was good at that for a while.
He really was. He was a very good romantic for a while, honestly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly where I thought we would go with that. Excellent.
Let's talk about his response to Frankenstein's death.
Yeah.
Actually, before that, can I just say, I think that this was just an aspect of Mary leading how she wanted to lead the reader on, but I could not believe that Frankenstein did not realize that the monster was going to go for his wife. Like, as I'm reading it, like 2 chapters before it happens, I'm reading it at bedtime, and I like exclaimed to my wife, I was like, how stupid is this guy? But I think that was probably one of those things where we readers were supposed to get it and he wasn't.
Well, and it fits with his kind of one-track mind, monomaniacal way of being. I think that
it's all about me.
He gets kind of tunnel vision on something, and so he sees it as he's locked in this struggle between him and the monster. He hasn't even told his wife about it, so she's not even really a player in this at this point. And so I think, you're right. Most rational people, you would think, like, you wouldn't really
see it a mile away. He doesn't want to kill you. He wants to make you suffer.
Yeah.
So,
and you wouldn't
kill everyone around you.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to leave your wife alone when you know that there's a monster lurking around. Like, most people probably get that, but
that's our second practical tip for today. Don't leave your wife alone when there's a monster lurking around.
That's right. Just not a good idea.
Yeah.
It's literally every horror movie, right? Once they pair off is when people get in trouble. Yeah.
Exactly right. And the pretty one always gets it.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. So at the end here, I want to give you a chance to reconsider your characterization of the monster's response to Victor's death.
Okay. It
sounded to me like you were saying that the monster's like, well, he's dead. Nothing to do anymore, right? This world's that's kind of the end of my to-do list, so I'll just pop off as well.
No, not quite. I was oversimplifying just for comedic effect.
Excellent. Well, it was very funny. Thank you.
You're welcome. I tried.
So what interesting to me, he is properly undone by Frankenstein's death. And not just by maybe not even primarily by the death of his creator, which you could imagine that being a big deal. Like, God is dead. It's been a big deal for some people.
And we've killed him, literally.
And we've killed him. Yeah. It fits quite nicely. It's all very Nietzschean if you think about it. But it's also the weight of his own sins comes crushing in on him upon the death of Victor. Right. And he says this is it's the last couple pages of the novel here, 3 pages from the end of my edition, beginning with after the murder of Clerval, that paragraph. I returned to Switzerland, heartbroken and overcome. I pitied Frankenstein. My pity amounted to horror. I abhorred myself. This all makes sense to me for a murderer. This is how murderers feel, I'm told. But when I discovered that he, the author at once of my existence and of its unspeakable torments, dared to hope for happiness, that while he accumulated wretchedness and despair upon me, he sought his own enjoyment in feelings and passions from the indulgence of which I was forever barred, then impotent envy and bitter indignation filled me with an insatiable thirst for vengeance. Good stuff. I recollected my threat and resolved that it should be accomplished. I knew that I was preparing for myself a deadly torture, but I was the slave, not the master, of an impulse which I detested, yet could not disobey. Consolation of philosophy. The victim of evil is the evildoer. Yet when she died, nay, then I was not miserable. I had cast off all feeling, subdued all anguish, to riot in the excess of my despair. Now I underline this. Evil thenceforth became my good. Urged thus far, I had no choice but to adapt my nature to an element which I had willingly chosen. I had no choice but to become what I had willingly chosen to be. That's not a beautiful definition of the dynamics of sin, right? That or just addiction, if you're uncomfortable with the language of sin, that there are predicaments you can get yourself into by your free choice that you are unable to get yourself out of by your free choice. And that's what the monster is describing that he's done. And you think, is that really true? Well, I mean, we're 3 murders deep at this point. Well, really 4 if you count the servant that he framed for the murder of the boy as well. So we're 4 murders deep at this point. So I'm willing to believe that he's in blood stepped in so far where he'd await no more, returning where it's tedious as go o'er. But then all of that, when he says, so then 2 paragraphs down, 2 paragraphs down, the end of the next paragraph, when I run over the frightful catalog of my sins, I cannot believe that I am the same creature whose thoughts were once filled with sublime and transcendent visions of the beauty and the majesty of goodness. But it is even so. The fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. I'm interested in the fact that he has this moment prior to the death of Frankenstein, really after the death of Clerval. After the murder of Clerval, he has this moment of clarity in which he knows the nature of his sin and he hates it in a way that he didn't seem to have with the murder of Frankenstein's little brother. And yet he presses on because of envy. He can't stand that Frankenstein should have the very type of happiness that he himself wanted and that Frankenstein refuses to give to him. And so he goes deeper and deeper into that wretchedness for envy. This is a deep challenge to that notion, that old, ultimately, well, I guess it's a Platonic notion, but Plotinus really, no, leave it. No, it is Plato and Aristotle that I want to attack here. That old notion that if we know the good, we'll do the good. That we never do anything except insofar as it seems good to us.
Right.
It's things like this that have always made me feel like that's not the right explanation of things. Even though I know how you can answer every possible charge with like, no, well, you're doing it because you like the pain or whatever the thing is. I get it. But even after all the arguments are done, there remains in me this sense that sometimes I just choose wickedness for the sake of being wicked. And the fact that other people don't seem to believe me when I say that makes me feel like maybe I really am the worst of all the sinners. But the monster gets it. But I think the monster's there. I don't think the monster is pursuing anything he perceives as good. He knows he's pursuing it as he says, my evil had become my good. But the way he's talking about it proves that that's not true. He still thinks it's an evil and he's tormented by it. But he's locked in because I'm just not going to let him have it either. You know what's funny? I think that's the scariest part of the thing for me. It's not the monster randomly showing up at your bedside at night. It's not the hunting down everyone you love and all that kind of stuff. It's the monster's moral deterioration, where he reaches a point where he honestly believes that he no longer has any moral choice but to do the things that he hates the most.
Right.
And ultimately destroy himself utterly to become the monster.
who says? I feel like maybe that's a medieval adage, right? That the spoiling of the good is the worst, something like that. Like
Yeah, that's right.
It's watching that happen is horrible. It's a terror. That is the nightmare.
Yeah.
And when we do that, then there is a loss of harmony. I mean, you have a devolution that occurs, right? On the one hand, when he is telling his story, the monster, when he finds Frankenstein and they finally are kind of catching up, when he describes the first few stages of his life, it's all evolution, right? He's coming into a sense of being. He discovers his different faculties and can distinguish between them, and he can learn how to read, and he can learn what he likes to eat, and there's this kind of becoming. There is something that he is. We don't really know completely what that is, but he's obviously becoming something.
Yeah.
And then once you get to that point where he's driven out, where he feels like he has to choose the evil, you have now he doesn't know himself. Whereas at the beginning he was knowing himself. He was coming to know himself. So it's a disintegration that occurs, and it's quite terrifying.
Yeah, that's right. It in essence, that central driving question of his being in those early days when he's learning, and he's experiencing beauty and the delights of intellectual pursuits and this sort of a thing, that driving question of what am I, it ultimately never gets answered because he turns away from becoming something and falls back into chooses unbecoming. Right? The souls in Dante's hell are shades. They're not really people. They're what's left over of people.
That's right. Yeah. Evil is dehumanizing.
Yeah, that's right. Well, on that cheerful note,
I did find it funny, to go back to the thing about babies. The monster does think marriage is going to save him.
Yeah.
Which that never works out for anybody who thinks that either. I mean, marriage does save us in one sense, but not in the way that the monster assumes it will.
Yeah,
it's a good thing. Marriage is a good thing, but it's not. It is not going to fix your particular issues if you.
Getting married won't fix anything that's wrong with you automatically. It'll give you a good crucible for working on it, but it's not going to just fix stuff. And that's the interesting thing to me is that Frankenstein is sensible to his responsibilities as a creator. He says that at one point. He says, "I felt what the duties of a creator towards his creature were, and that I ought to render him happy before I complained of his wickedness." And because of that, he decides, you know what, I will make the Bride of Frankenstein. Which, by the way, I'd always thought that was just a shameless money grab. Bride of Frankenstein. No, it's right there. I will make the Bride of Frankenstein. I'll do this for him. But then later on, he reflects that he can bestow life on her, but he can't guarantee that she will be good, that she will choose the creature. And if she rejects the creature, then he's going to have been rejected again, and he'll go deeper into wickedness, and she may go off into her own wickedness. And now there's two monsters running around the world killing babies. And so he says, I can't do it. All right. I experienced a genuine moral dilemma wrestling over this question on Victor's behalf. Like, what should he have done?
Yeah.
Right. Like, there was the chance that if you made her, the two would have gone off and been happy, and you would have been free, and that would have been the end of the matter. But there was also the chance that they would have gone on either a joint or separate killing sprees all over Europe. I mean, we've all seen how love can change us, and the person can kind of make us better or worse, change us in their direction. And so I was like, oh, there's the, it's a tough question, and we don't have time to unfold it here. I think Mary Shelley did a wonderful job of painting Victor's aporia. Like, what do I do? Right? Both ways seem bad.
Yes. And I mean, the monster has self-diagnosed himself
Mm-hmm.
The issue is loneliness. The issue is not having a significant other. So if you give me this, I'll be happy. The problem is he's diagnosed himself from a place of being fallen.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't something he has decided before he committed wickedness.
Mm-hmm.
This is something he's telling his creator after he's already sinned against the creator.
Yeah.
He's already killed Frankenstein's little brother, and he's
Yeah.
demanding this from him. And so one wonders, A, about the genuineness of the demand. Will he really go off? Will this really work out? But B, one wonders about the actual accuracy of the prescription. Is this really what he needs?
Mm-hmm.
And is he in the position to judge that at that point?
That's right. That's right. I can recall when I was at an equally undeveloped place as the creature is at that point morally, when I thought there were things that would be my salvation, that either I got them and discovered that they weren't, that they didn't satisfy in the ways that I hoped, or I can see in hindsight that had I gotten them, they would not have satisfied in the ways that I wanted. And so, so what happens if you make the female monster and he realizes it's not doing it for him, and he goes off on his own, and now she's jilted, right? And again, you've got two of them out there. So there's a lot of unknown around making a second one. But I think Frankenstein is correctly understanding in that moment that he can give life, but he can't control it at that point. It goes off into the world and it's going to do what it's going to do. And that's the thing that he's like, I can't risk being the author of yet another monster.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Great book.
Really good book. It was very enjoyable. Each time I read it, I feel like I get a little more out of it.
I think you probably picked this one. And if so, thank you, because nice.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, because I sure did too. And it was good to talk through with you. It always makes the books come alive in a new way to get to have these kind of conversations, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, should we go ahead and kind of land the plane and maybe do our end notes?
I'm ready. I've got such a good end note.
Go for it.
My end note is a short story by Isaac Asimov called Bicentennial Man.
Oh, is that the Robin Williams movie?
Yes. So after Asimov published it as a novelette in 1976, the year I was born, and then in 1992, Robert Silverberg expanded it into a novel, and then that was adapted into the 1999 film with Robin Williams. I recommend going all the way back to Asimov's original story, both because it's shorter and you've got other books to read for us here, but also it's very tight. He puts it together very well. So what happens is there's this robot. So he's created by humans, right? And he's got the laws, the 3 laws of robotics. But he is he has an artistic awakening, carving wooden trinkets for the daughter of the family that he's with. And this leads him on a journey to where he begins to feel a great affinity for humans and to desire to himself become human. And he goes on a 200-year journey, hence the title of the story, to try to become human. And it's very interesting. It does not end in the sort of him going bad and going on a murderous rampage way that Frankenstein does, but it's an interesting reflection on what it means to be human and the lengths that the creature will go to attain the level of being that its creator has.
Wow. Interesting. I'll have to read it. I've never seen the movie, but I remember seeing it in a Blockbuster when I was younger. And
it's got a very striking cover.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, I have 2. One of them is a song. Again, I feel like I've been doing a lot of songs lately, but the song "Show Me How to Live" by Audioslave is explicitly a retelling of Frankenstein from the monster's perspective. So just the last verse in the song is well, actually I should say the chorus. "Nail in my head from my creator, you gave me life, now show me how to live," is repeated a couple times. And then in verse 2 he says, "And in the afterbirth on the quiet earth, let the stains remind you, you thought you made a man, you better think again before my role defines you." And it's pretty good song too. And so definitely starting with that. The second thing that I have is a novel that I read somewhat recently, but as I was reading this one, I felt like I had a lot of deja vu moments. Grendel, the novel Grendel, which is sort of a postmodern retelling. It's by John Gardner. It's sort of a postmodern retelling of the Beowulf story from the monster's perspective. Yeah. And some similar themes, I think. I mean, I think Mary Shelley is more classical in her telling of this. I think she leaves some things open, but you're still operating with a sort of virtue and vice framework. I think in Frankenstein, I think once you get to Gardner's novel, it's kind of less about that. But still, I think it's kind of an interesting way to continue the conversation. Maybe continues the conversation that we're having about a lot of the themes in this book in a way that more modern and postmodern oriented people would maybe resonate with a little more, which is both maybe good and bad. But it's an interesting novel. Have you read it?
I've not.
Okay.
I'm familiar with it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, I feel like you wouldn't like it. If you thought Love in the Ruins was too modernist, then this is going to be way too far. But it was interesting. The idea of monster is something we actually had Kristen Rudd on here for a bonus episode a long time ago. She was teaching a class on monsters and literature, and I think some of the questions that we talked about in that interview come up in the Grendel novel. And anyways, good stuff.
Nice.
Well, we have one more book in season 3 of The Classical Mind, and that book is Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare, which I guess it's more of a play. It's not really a book, but yes, we will be reading it. So in that sense, it's a book. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun. A nice change of pace after a couple heavy episodes.
That's right. Yeah, there'll be a little chaser to end the season.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, listeners, thanks again for tagging along with us. And we will see you next month for Taming of the Shrew. And in the meantime, keep reading.